Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this panel on skills and sustainability, how better regulation can fix the UK's built environment. My name is Adam Hawksby. I'm Deputy Director of Onward, and my team are clearly playing some sort of practical joke on me that at 9:30 in the morning I'm doing an event with CIB, RICS, RIBA, RTPI. I think
SYMCA as well.
That's it, SYMCA. I think I owe them a drink every time I get one of those things wrong. And it's all gone a bit Game of Thrones. We're all kind of here with our banners behind us. So if you ever get confused about who is who, just look at what's immediately behind them. I'm really glad that we're doing this event with these four kind of excellent partners and with Oliver. We've had a lot of discussions both at this conference and with Oliver, as in you're not one of the people supporting the event, that's all. Not that you're tagged on to the end.
Not one of the excellent partners. That's fine.
We've been having a lot of conversations about housing at both conferences, and I think one of the things that often gets missed in debates that are about kind of house building targets or whatever else are all the things around the housing and planning system that need to happen in order to build not just more homes, but also good homes, homes in the right places and ones that support communities. And so we've got a range of organisations here today that have responsibilities in different parts of that system, and then can talk about the kind of work they've done, some of the challenges that they're facing. And then Oliver, and in fact I might even come to you last in comments if that's all right, because Oliver I think can really helpfully outline what that means in a particular place, and why we at Onward are really keen to work with regional mayors of all parties, is that they can see how these things come together in their patch. So let me introduce my panel. I'm delighted to be joined by, on my immediate right, Sandy Rees-Jones, President of the Chartered Institute of Building. To her right, Moiwa Oki, the President of the Royal Institute of British Architects. To Oliver's left, I've got Lindsay Richards, who's the President of the Royal, the Vice President of the Royal Town Planning Institute. And then on the far left of the panel, Justin Young, the CEO of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. And on my immediate left, Oliver Coppard, the Mayor of South Yorkshire, who's been doing a huge amount of work in the last few years, particularly on advocating for transport skills and housing for his region. So we're going to start with a few opening remarks. Apologies, this room does get quite warm. It's a sort of exact replica of the docking station of the Death Star. I don't know why they've gone for that look, but it does mean it gets a bit toasty. But we will make sure we get people in as they come. And once we've done those opening remarks, I'll come to all of you for some questions. But let's start with some of our partners. So Sandy, let me come to you at the Chartered Institute of Building. What are some of the things that maybe you've been hearing around at conference over the last couple of days that have been comforting to you, and what things do you think both parties need to be talking about more?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I probably ought to say what the Chartered Institute of Building is. Yes, I'm a builder. Well, I'm a construction manager. The Chartered Institute of Building has been set up with Royal Charter. It's been in place since 1834, and it's concerned with construction management. So it's setting and maintaining the standards, the competencies on construction management, because construction is complicated, so you need to manage it. And the reason we're a broad church is because there are so many players, and some of this has come across in these party conferences so far. You've got house builders, you've got contractors, you've got specialist subcontractors, you've got material suppliers, you've got people on site, you've got planning regulations. So we try to manage it. Now, our corporate plan, 5-year corporate plan, which we launched in June, has 3 key areas, 2 of which are on the agenda today. So skills and sustainability, and also quality and safety, and they're all interlinked. And my personal presidential theme is collaboration, because all these issues are so complicated, we're not going to solve them unless we work together. So it's great to be on a panel with my colleagues from the sister institutions. Right, cut to the chase. Sustainability. Right. Some of you in the room will probably know that buildings use energy to run, but buildings have embodied energy because they're built and take energy to be built. So we have these 2 different bundles, if you like. Now, there's already a regulation in place on the operational carbon emissions. What we believe at the CIOB is there is a need for a mandatory regulation on the embodied carbon of buildings. Some contractors are already doing it because they think it's the right thing to do. Some clients are asking for it, but we believe it should be mandatory. So operational carbon emissions, if you like, are managed under Part L. We're calling for Part Z in order to look at both sides. And the important subtext of this is that construction is often seen as the problem creator, but we can be the problem solver. So we have to make that shift. Okay, deep disappointment with the announcement this week on rowing back on net zero targets for housing. We need a national retrofit strategy. We have the oldest housing stock in Europe. People are living in awful homes, and I like to talk about homes, not housing. We're talking about homes. It's not the obsession with owning a house, it's how do we provide decent housing. So we support a national retrofit strategy, and now I can segue into skills. We don't have enough people in our industry. We're 225,000 people short across the board. If we have a national retrofit strategy, we will create jobs, provided it is planned and regulated and properly funded and organised. That will locally, and I think there's a lot here locally, it will create the right jobs in the right areas for people. But in order to get those people interested, we also need a policy on education. We would like to see a built environment GCSE. They're doing it in Wales. We'd like to see it rolled out. Plus, with skills, the industry has two levies to deal with. Have a CITB levy and an apprenticeship levy. It needs to be sorted. It's not fit for purpose, so we are calling for a skills strategy. I shall stop there because I've probably used my 5 minutes.
I mean, a lot of really specific policy stuff there to be picked up, particularly the national retrofit strategy. We've done a lot of work on that, and I think the lack of a joined-up plan meant that regardless of whether those 2035 targets were moved, it was going to be very tricky to hit them, for particularly homes for some of the most vulnerable communities. Justin, let's come to you for the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. Your thoughts on this topic?
Great, thank you. And some very similar themes as far as we're concerned. So I'll be building on a number of things that Sandy has said. So certainly skills shortage, it's absolutely there. You've heard the 225,000 figure. I'm particularly interested from RICS from the point of view of 4,000 of that number are surveyors. And we do need to have more surveyors so that we can, across the board, fill those positions. But it's not just the absolute number of people who need to join the sector, it's also the diversity of people who join. At the moment, only 18% of people in the construction industry are female, only 6% from ethnic minorities, and 6% with disabilities. So we're only just choosing from a really narrow slice, and we need to broaden that out so that we can represent the communities properly. And it's not just people coming into the industry either. It's also people who are already in the industry, and we need to upskill those people so that they can deliver for the future needs of the sector. And those needs are absolutely around retrofitting, as Sandy has already referred to, and the new technology that comes in that's going to replace gas boilers and all those sorts of pieces. Secondly then, housing targets. Now, do you choose 300,000, 450,000, in a year, or is it 1.5 million in 5 years? Whatever the number is, we know it's a big number. And again, it's not just the number that's important, it is right houses in the right places. We've heard that already, and it's about safety and it's about sustainability. So those are the key parts of those housing targets. And that then links back to the skills point I made around you've got to build the skills to come into the sector that can deal with those issues in particular. What that then comes onto is built environment education. And Sandy's already mentioned the GCSE, which again, let's hope we can push it beyond Wales and into the rest of the UK so that we have GCSEs in England, also in Northern Ireland, and the equivalent qualification in Scotland. We're also seeing, yes, an increase in apprenticeships, great, but it's a decrease currently in built environment degrees at universities, up to a 40% decrease in the last 5 years. So that balance is shifting, but they should both be growing, not with one diminishing. At RICS, we have a schools programme. That's great. I know my colleagues in the other institutions also have schools programmes, but it's a pretty small number. We reach 19,000 pupils a year in the 14 to 16 age category, but we need to be able to reach more. And so we've got this big gap between a sector that's absolutely desperate for skills and an education curriculum that doesn't produce the skills that are needed. And that gap is getting wider, and we need to make it close. Finally then, the greener built environment. Real focus on regulation around house building. And this is where the regulation becomes very important. It's a clarity of vision, because with clarity, it makes the sector more attractive to employees, and it makes the sector much more attractive to investors as well. And investors like regulation because it provides stability. And so that's where we need to bring in, increase the regulation that we already have in this space. And of course, investment requires standard measures as well. Again, Sandy mentioned these. RICS has a retrofit standard. We also have the whole life carbon assessment. So the embodied carbon that Sandy was referring to, it can be measured consistently, and that is what investors want to see, so they know the true value of their asset. So 3 points really from me: targets for greener, safer homes, focus on the built environment education, and regulation to encourage investment. More than enough from me.
Fantastic, thank you so much. I'm loving the sound of this built environment GCSE. It isn't a proposal I'd heard about before, but would love to hear more. Moira, let's come to you from the Royal Institute of British Architects.
Thank you so much, Adam. It's great to be here to discuss these important issues. My name is Moira Oki. I'm the president of the Royal Institute of British Architects, like I said, and we here at the RIBA we are focused on the climate emergency, and sustainability in the built environment is something that is a key priority for my term in office. For those who don't know, the UK's built environment is the second highest carbon emitter. And also, there's some homes right now that are being built which will need to be retrofitted in this decade. Some new homes that we're building will need to be retrofitted in this new decade. And what that means is that we need, like Sandy has already mentioned, we need stronger standards for the new buildings and the existing buildings that we should be retrofitting. These standards need to reduce the operational energy and the embodied energy and carbon associated in creating these buildings. The sector has already been leading the way in creating a standard. It's called the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard, and it's a joint collaborative venture to set a standard to devise how to calculate embodied carbon, operational energy, so that we can define what a net zero carbon building looks like. Because there isn't an agreed methodology to define how you can prove that your built asset is net zero carbon. This standard is also in line with the climate targets that the UK has set previously, because it's changed now, as we know, with the new announcement. Because we need to be, as we said, we need to get to net zero by 2050, and this standard, once implemented, will get the built environment on a level playing field to get us there. And what we need from the government is to adopt this standard, because as Sandy has already mentioned, lots of companies are doing good things, but also we need to get the level playing field so that every company is adopting this standard so that they can measure the impact of their build assets. So we welcome some of Labour's party's commitment to spend about $6 billion a year to tackle homes most in need of retrofitting, and the commitment and plans to bring 19 million leaky homes up to scratch and create a highest standard of insulation. And what that would do is make a big difference to people nationwide, help reduce their bills and things like that. And I think that pledges will also help insulate homes, create jobs for about nearly 4 million jobs for people, because right now there's only about 200,000 people working on retrofitting homes at present. So what we're calling for, like Sandy and Justin has mentioned, is the national retrofit strategy. Because a well-funded long-term retrofit strategy will bring all these things together: the insulation, the funding, the skills together to create a demand, level the playing field, and make sure that the built environment moves from one of the leakiest and highest carbon emitter to get us closer to net zero.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And the retrofit point is so important that you hear about targets of how many homes people want to do. If you don't get the supply chains right, if you don't do it strategically and make sure all the bits work, then you'll never deliver whatever ambitious targets you set. Lindsay, you guys have just published your planning manifesto, your planifesto, which I'm frankly very jealous that you managed to get that pun as a title for your work. Your thoughts on this from the RTPI perspective?
Thank you. Well, we know planning is going to be and is a significant issue, and I'm going to be a bit cheeky here, actually, Adam, because although we're talking about skills and sustainability, I can't talk without talking about resourcing local planning authorities and actually the sector as a whole. So don't forgive me for that. That's intentional, and that's a key issue around. So we've heard this morning from Rachel Reeves about an antiquated planning system. We've had years of planning reforms, and actually those are impacting the sector significantly. So it's not just about resourcing, but it's actually making sure the skills are there to implement those planning reforms. So we need to get on with it. So, and what we need some certainty, we need some confidence in the sector to actually encourage investment, and we need smart growth, which is around infrastructure, timely infrastructure, and actually having that certainty amongst partners and all stakeholders. So planning is a significant tool. It undermines, and it's the foundation of everything we've just heard about this morning, and it's actually key to delivering that smart growth. So for me, planning it's not a regulatory, it's not something about imposing regulations or relaxing. It's actually about understanding local priorities, local characteristics, and actually understanding corporate priorities for our local authority partners and combined authorities. So you've mentioned, Adam, the planifesto. That underlies a lot of the resourcing issues, and it's also supporting the asks around skills. So one of those asks from the RTPI is around chief planners. And it's around chief planners to support a high quality planning service to make sure that the chief planner is sat at the top table in the local authority, feeding into the corporate priorities, ambitions and aspirations of those local areas. So we feel, and also ensuring actually it's properly resourced, and there's delivering a quality service which actually would support the private sector, obviously, as well as the public sector. And then the second ask within the planifesto is around supporting local authorities to undertake the master developer role. There's the role here which takes skills, it's ambition, and we need a supportive national government to take that forward. But in order to act as a master developer, that provides certainty, so it's aligned with local plans, making sure local plans are in place, but it's around assembling and supplying land, infrastructure on suitable sites, and actually be able to work with local communities so that they actually understand where growth will take place. So it's around, so that's within the planifesto, and there are other asks as well around that. But the value of planning is huge, and it gives, as I mentioned, it gives confidence, it gives certainty, and that leads to growth and investment. But we can't, there's an elephant in the room, and I have to talk about resourcing in local authorities, which is impacting on the private sector as well. And so for me, there's a real sort of connection between actually having the right skills in place and resourcing the planning function. And if we're under-resourced in a planning function, then actually how can we expect our local authority colleagues to take time out to actually undertake training, share best practice, talk about knowledge share, when actually they're spending their time doing the day job and not as effectively. We have local authorities with numerous vacancies and unable to fill those roles. We're also experiencing those, I would say, those more highly skilled planners who've been in it for, middle managers are actually leaving the profession. And there's a number of reasons for that. There's around, we could argue and say it's around aggression, misinformation, the use of social media. But we're seeing a flux of planners leaving the local authority, and actually some planners actually leaving the profession as well. So if we want to build a skill set, we need to be resourcing adequately. We need to be able to support those planners in those professions. And I think the final thing I would say, and this is a bit Oliver, we need to be providing support and skills to planners, professional planners, but also elected members. And it's quite interesting, actually, where talking to the LGA about parish councils, and they have mandatory planning training at parish council level. So is that something that we need to be thinking about, building the total skill set around understanding planning? Planning's got a lot to offer and a lot more to do, and it needs to be resourced correctly.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Oliver's got a mandatory training course now. that'll be fun. So Oliver, let's come to you. You've had a huge amount there, skills and education, standards and measures, retrofit, infrastructure, regulation, some of that within your gift, lots of it not. How do you think about kind of tackling these challenges, building the right homes, ensuring that they are sustainable, helping to meet some of your net zero targets?
Yeah, okay, I'll come on to that. But before I do, why do I have a horrible feeling that I'm going to be asked to resit a GCSE? This is the way it seems to be.
Qualified by experience.
Yeah, okay, good. Politicians in general like talking about what their parents did, don't they? And I think this is the first time I can say in a room full of friends that my dad was a town planner, and that get a sort of relatively warm reception for that. Not a bus driver.
Literally a round of applause.
That's great. Indeed. Okay, so look, I've been mayor for 18 months, give or take. And the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority has only really been in existence for around 4 or 5 years. So compared to Sandy, who's got an organisation dating back to 1834, we're relatively newcomers on the block. But I know this is an important topic for not just my combined authority, but for the country. And I sort of just reflect that I know we're a serious party of government in waiting when a 9:30 fringe event on essentially town planning and reform of the planning system attracts a sold-out audience. So it is good to see so many people who are interested in the subject and will be hopefully partners with us to try and solve some of those problems. I'm conscious that that there has been a significant failure from this government when it comes to things like house building. And I think we probably all agree on that in this room. And I think in their quiet moments of reflection, I would imagine the government probably agree on that as well. One of the things that I'm struck by when I hear more learned colleagues on this panel talk about planning and regulation and how we build more homes is that there seems to be a genuine and general consensus about what some of the solutions look like from people who work in this sector. And that isn't always the case. Often when I talk to government, there are quite divergent views about policy and where we need to go. But in this space, it feels like there's general agreement that there are certain things that could be done and done relatively swiftly that would help change the way in which we build homes, the way we make sure that our communities have safe and secure places to live. Look, I think there are two challenges, and South Yorkshire feels these acutely. And those two challenges are particularly to build more homes that are of a sufficiently high standard. Clearly, I think that is of front of mind for all of us. So that is absolutely kind of what I want to be doing in South Yorkshire. But then we also need to make sure that we are kind of dealing with the planning system to make sure that we are able to sort of crack that nut. So we need to make sure that we are kind of getting to grips with that. And that's why one of the reasons why I'm so pleased to see Rachel's speech today and her focusing so much on planning and planning reform. I think it's a really important subject that hasn't had enough political airtime, so glad that Rachel's doing that. I think the second part of that is what do we do with our existing housing stock? and our existing housing stock in South Yorkshire. We have about 600,000 homes in South Yorkshire, about 90% of the stock, which is going to need some sort of intervention. And that's going to take a significant effort, and there's clearly challenges in there, not just around things like funding, but also around skills. And that's even before you get into the more politically tricky areas of essentially consent. How do we do that with the consent of our communities and with our communities? I think that's where mayors come into play, quite honestly. So I'm very pleased to be able to kind of have this conversation, because mayors, I think, are central to the solutions in some of this, particularly on skills, solving that capacity. I was having this conversation with Steve Rotherham and others in front of Keir yesterday, talking about, and Angela, if we want to solve this problem, we need to be working with the potential Labour government now in order to be able to solve the capacity issues, to get the skills system firing, to be able to deliver on the targets that we have, which are ambitious, and all the better for that. But we do need to work through the capacity issues there, and mayors can play a role there in terms of skills funding. We could do more with more powers, more money, more flexibility, but right now, even with what we've got, we can do more. So that's, I think, important. On funding, drawing in more funding into the region. So we've just signed a deal with South Yorkshire Pensions Authority for £500 million worth of funding to come into South Yorkshire. We've just signed a memorandum of understanding with Aviva. We're working with L&G, met Homes England the other day, and have plans there too. So there are a bunch of organisations that can help us draw down funding in order to be able to solve some of these problems, and we're doing our best in that space. In terms of planning, you look at what Sadiq has in terms of planning powers and controls versus what I have and other mayors have. Formally in the devolution agreement that South Yorkshire has, it says design and supply. I have a remit for design and supply, but I don't have any powers, formal powers over design and supply. So kind of mayors having more powers in that space, and Sadiq, I think, is the exemplar there of what can be done, is important. And then last but not least, I think that delivery element, just mayors actually significantly ramping up their capacity around delivery. That might be around hiring more planning officers. It might be engaging with our communities to clear out some of those challenges, to make sure that kind of actually we are able to work with our communities, do this with our communities, not to our communities. I kind of reject the idea that this can't be done, that there are constantly going to be just never-ending challenges that are going to stop us from building things, from doing things better or differently. But I do think if we're going to have this conversation, we need to have it with our communities first and foremost. And if we can do that, we can actually have a sensible conversation about how we plan, how we grow, what the benefits look like, as well as what the costs look like. In South Yorkshire, we're engaging in a citizens' assembly, particularly focused on climate. That will be 100 members of our community, demographically representative, the biggest regional assembly of its kind. And one of the days will focus on the built environment, which is, I think, an important signal to my community, South Yorkshire, that we're going to engage in a conversation in a sensible way. We know where we need to get to, where we want to get to, and how we might do some of that, but we need to do that in a way which engages our communities first and foremost. So the delivery element of that, I think, is really important.
Fantastic, thank you, Oliver. And can I be cheeky and ask, so on spatial planning and regional spatial planning, so my old job was working for Andy Street in the West Midlands, had the ability to introduce a spatial plan across the region, and he wouldn't use this language, but wouldn't go near it, right? Because it would be an enormous challenge, particularly that you'd have parts of the region that would be worried that more of the housing would go in their patch because there might be more availability of land, whatever else. You saw some of the challenges Greater Manchester had. I think Liverpool City region are embarking or partway through the process now. If you did have those powers, so you're implying that you want those powers, would you definitely use them? And would you anticipate any political resistance from members of the combined authority?
Look, I think that there is an important point in here more broadly, which is that I didn't get into this job in order to do the easy things. I got into this job in order to do the hard things, in order to grow the economy of South Yorkshire, in order to create more homes, in order to create better jobs, in order to create opportunities. South Yorkshire is my home, it's where I'm from, it's where I was born and raised. It's the place that I want to make better. And in order to do that, yes, you are going to have to take on some big and difficult things, and spatial planning is, if not at the top of the list, it's near the top of the list. Mm-hmm. And I don't doubt the complexities of that system. I definitely need to do the GCSE. I need to understand absolutely at a fundamental level how some of this works, and I think that is the challenge for all elected officials. But ultimately, I don't think we should shy away from the fact that if we're going to solve the problems that we have in our economy, in our communities, in terms of housing and growth and everything else, that we need to take these things head on. I have no doubt there will be challenges behind closed doors, conversations, hard conversations with members of my combined authority. I welcome those conversations. We've had hard conversations throughout the last 18 months and we'll continue to have them, but it is only by engaging in those hard conversations and arguing from a point of principle rather than a point of either projects or something more, more minute detail, that we are able to get through those bigger challenges, and that's what we're trying to do, and that's what I am here to do.
Good, excellent. That'll be music to Lindsay's ear, I'm sure. So let's come to some questions from you guys. If you'd like to ask a question, just throw your hand up and then say your name and the organisation you're from. I had one hand that went immediately up, just there in the middle, and then we'll take a question here from the front. There'll be mics that will come to you just so you can catch you on the stream.
Thank you, everyone. Morning, everyone. I'm Nicola Beach. I'm a Cabinet Member for Planning at Bristol City Council. So this debate has been music to my ears on many, many fronts, but also feels ambitious to a point where doing the hard yards of the front line doesn't always feel like those things will all happen. But I do like your planifesto. My question is, so our regional mayor scrapped his spatial plan, which was incredibly disappointing. I would love you to do a strategic plan for Yorkshire, and I think it could set a blueprint for the whole nation, and I think it's exactly what we need to do. So my first question is, what is the view of the room around kind of the analogy about pancakes or pyramids? Like, do we densify our urban centres, or do we actually accept the fact that our cities need to grow? My second question is about the delivery of affordable housing, because it hasn't been mentioned once, and I think that's a real disappointment. All the things you've talked about are great, but they can't be seen outside of the abstract of like the political leadership of Labour cities to deliver the homes that our people can afford to live in. And so my question would be, how can you mainstream the types of low carbon building and embodied carbon policies so that they sit outside the viability process, so we can actually either reform viability or we can deliver the affordable homes we need? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's take the other question from the front just here.
Hello, I'm Tess Colley. I'm a journalist with Ends Report, the environmental news outlet. I'd be interested to hear the panel's view on what's the building and construction sector's message to Labour on environmental regulations outside of the climate sphere. But so we're talking about like nutrient neutrality or kind of water scarcity, things that have come under a lot of pressure from the political right. Would you like to see those strengthened, or let's talk about a kind of a scrapping bill for nutrient neutrality coming in with the Tory party? Would you support that? What's your message to Labour on it?
Fantastic, thank you. And then I can take one more question in this round if there is one. Yep, just from the front here.
Thank you very much. David Claydon from Kaya in London. Can I just ask the question of fitting in sort of urban and building with energy transition and energy transmission infrastructure, the questions of greening the building stock through electrification and what that means for the scale of construction. How do you see that as a priority fitting in with built environment priorities?
Massive question. We've had a lot of discussions about pylons on onward panels in the last couple of weeks. I'll direct some of these to members of the panel, but if you do have kind of research or insight on this, just to catch my eye and I'll bring you in. Moira, let me come to you first on this really interesting pancakes or pyramids question. How should we be thinking about delivering some of these homes in the right way? Is it doing that densification work, or is it kind of more distributed?
It's both, but I'll tell you why. 80% of the buildings that we're going to be living in by the year 2050 is already being built right now. So we need to have a strategy for going back and retrofitting and bringing it up to scratch so that they are fit for now and also the future. That means it goes back to the conversation we had about retrofit strategy and creating that long-term, well-funded piece to make sure the homes and buildings that we are using right now is fit for the future. So that means we need to look at engaging with, using, and adapting our existing buildings in our cities and town centers. But also, we need to be doing that across with our local authorities, because they know where and what we need to do to make a sustainable built environment for the location, the locality, to make sure that it's used, because a sustainable building is only as sustainable if people actually use it properly. And it's up to the local leaders to match local funding and local skills and people who can deliver that retrofit work, but also deliver the new building that is needed. So I think in all, sustainability, the sustainable building is only as sustainable, it's only as sustainable as how it is being used.
Mm-hmm.
This is also why we're calling for a post-occupancy evaluation. This means going into a building and measuring how that building is used in contrast to what it was designed to the energy and all the other things that it was designed to be. So we're asking that when we're doing new buildings, we also add the fact that the builders and the owners of the asset go back and measure what it was the design in design, but also how that design is being used, and make sure that it's up to the net zero building standard as we talked about. So yeah, it's both.
Thank you. Sandy, let me come to you on this question about environmental regulation. Tess is at the front, the kind of nutrient neutrality challenge. That seems to be one of the early kind of tests of the kind of builders not blockers type thing. I can entirely understand both the Labour position and the government position. How do you feel about nutrient neutrality and broader environmental regulations that might constrain building?
The rowback on that and the whole issue around it was deeply disappointing again. We're at CIOB, and me personally, and I think many, many people in the country actually are horrified by this. And it has to be managed. I think we firmly support net zero sustainability impact. So it needs to be managed, and it needs to be seen to be managed in a correct way. Can I segue cheekily into the affordable housing?
You absolutely can.
We're not involved in new building as such, however, in terms of targets. But I'd like to pick up something Oliver's said, and also the question about affordable housing, which is we need to make it easier for small and medium-sized builders to have access to reasonable-sized plots of land in communities, so something needs to be done there about land values. And then the local builders can build housing that is affordable and appropriate for that community. It creates jobs, and it should be done in a way that makes them affordable. And that also picks up Oliver's comment about how you engage people. Many years ago, when I was involved in major international infrastructure projects, an engineer commented that if we're really going to succeed in doing this difficult stuff, we need to move from dad to mum. DAD stands for Decide, Announce, Defend. And what we should be doing is meet, unify, and motivate. And to do that, you need a powerful narrative, and that's where we can work with regional mayors, local authorities, local communities, SME builders, and the infrastructure to deliver. So that's one route. Rather than simply saying, let's set a target for affordable homes, how do we do it? And that's one of the mechanisms which we would support. Develop the narrative, meet, talk. I'm also a mediator. It's difficult. You need to find a way of engaging.
Thank you. I've got more acronyms I need to remember now. Okay, Oliver, let's come to you. I do want to ask you about this question of nutrient neutrality from Tess here at the front, and to what degree, if that indicates that Labour actually, when it comes to some of the tricky trade-offs around building, are stepping away, are stepping back. I know you think that's unfair, but does it represent that? And then on affordability as well, I mean, Sadiq Khan, as the Mayor of London, has been very successful in hitting his affordable housing targets, but the kind of net additional dwellings in London haven't necessarily been quite as impressive. So how do you think about the trade-off there with affordability and net increase in numbers?
So on the nutrient neutrality question, I mean, I think it's fair to say, I think what the government would do was trying to set a trap for the Labour Party. So frankly, I don't necessarily buy into the idea that that means that the Labour Party is anything other than committed to the highest environmental standards. I speak as a mayor who has now responsibility for the nature recovery strategy in South Yorkshire. So these questions are going to be a front of mind for me when looking at the kind of potential future development sites and opportunities in places like South Yorkshire. I think it is fair to say, and we have to have this conversation, don't we, about what the green belt means in places like South Yorkshire, across the UK, what is brownfield, etc. One of the more successful elements of things that we've done with the government has been on things like brownfield housing, bringing some of those old industrial sites back into use, and I think there is a huge amount that we could do in that space without impacting on the natural environment. So the idea that somehow this is a trade-off between building on some pristine Peak District land and having more homes, and you can't have one without the other, you can only have one of those, is I think for the birds absolutely there's a huge opportunity, and it goes to the question about are we building pyramids or are we building pancakes, which I did also want to answer, which is just to say, look, in the nicest possible way, I think that's entirely the wrong question. For me, the question is, how do we build livable communities? How do we build places that people want to live, right? And to a certain extent, it's not for me to answer that question, whether that should be a skyscraper or a farmhouse. The question is, how do we crowd in the finance? How do we get the skills? How do we sort out planning? And then ultimately, we let the market decide where people want to live. And I have no doubt that the market can solve that problem if we are able to unlock some of the challenges that have been created by government. So we need to get that right, but we need to listen to communities about where they want to live and how they want to live their lives and make better communities. And the communities element that I think is really important. I've entirely forgotten the second part of your question.
The affordability piece. So,
how do we make houses affordable?
how do we deliver a sufficient number of affordable homes while still trying to do the kind of net increase in total homes?
Well, we need to solve the skills problem, the supply problem. We need to make sure that there is a system behind that allows us to build homes at a sufficient rate that we can bring prices down. And I think if we can get all of that right, there is no reason why we can't build sufficiently and why we can't get affordable housing in this country. That will take government investment, I'm sure. It will take investment from people like me. The Brownfield Housing Fund is, I think, a good example. Mm-hmm. And one of those sites, I think we're funding, I think it's around £11,000 per property now through the Brownfield Housing Fund for a big site in a place called Kelham Island in South Yorkshire, one of the coolest places in the world, apparently, according to Time Out. And now we're funding some of those developments. And so I think it's a mixture, but it's about the system that sits behind the building in order to be able to bring prices down, in my view.
Lindsay, let me bring you in on this.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to refer back to the Planifesto. So within the Planifesto, I make no apologies for that, there's reference there in terms of improving the Section 106 and the infrastructure levy to make sure there are community benefits, but also to make sure that there is the delivery of affordable housing and balanced communities. So apologies for no reference. For me as a planner, it goes without saying that we need balanced communities, which include a whole range of housing tenures across the piece. So what we're expecting, what we're hoping, what we're asking for is the reforms on the infrastructure levy would make sure that actually affordable housing is not last on the list, and it's not the last ask, that it becomes one of the top obligations and priorities, I would say. And I think talking about pancakes and pyramids, it goes back, and also providing smaller sites, which again supports affordable housing. Go back to the reference I made in terms of master planning and putting the skills in place, supporting local authorities to take forward those ambitions in as a master developer, so that they can acquire sites, acquire land, parcel those up, provide the infrastructure, have the certainty behind them of local plans, more strategic plans, and actually dispose of and sell or work in partnership with developers to deliver those sites. And we're talking about, if we have a range of housing tenure, then we're talking about different absorption rates, so we can have different sites at different phasing and different delivery, so we can get a range across a whole site. I think the point about master development sites or master sites is actually it gives certainty to local communities where facilities will be provided, where the new housing going, and around timely provision of infrastructure.
Justin, let me come to you this last question about transmission. And I think it is underappreciated the degree to which the net zero challenge is an electrification challenge. And actually some of the technical elements of that, how are we going to train people to build homes that are suited to that new era, is a real challenge. So, we're talking about skills and sustainability here. What are some of the things we need to do to deal with the future infrastructure that will underpin net zero?
Sure. And I think it's... can you hear me all right? Is this microphone on?
It is. Get a bit closer to it, Mr. Little.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Absolutely, the question is absolutely bang on. So it's no good just focusing on the housing sector or some commercial sectors. We've absolutely got to fix the infrastructure piece as well. And it comes down to the nitty-gritty of what finance is going to become available, and whether it's stuff around VAT, and that sort of hits on some of the other points that the rest of the panel are making, or other incentives that can become available, then that is where it is going to make the difference. And so we have to balance now both the infrastructure and the actual housing itself. And when I say it gets into the nitty-gritty, it's because if you look at some things like the infrastructure levy that we already have, it's tough because it doesn't necessarily incentivize developers to absolutely do the right thing at the moment. And because it all depends, again, in the detail around, are you actually going with the price that was quoted at the beginning or at the end of the project? And those two prices can be very, very different. Mm-hmm. So you get into some of this, and it's the same with the brownfield discussion we were having earlier on as well. It's, why is there VAT still on the demolition elements of dealing with brownfield sites? We need to sort of take a much more detailed perspective on all of these pieces so that we can get the right answer and drive the right behaviours in the end.
Fantastic, thank you. Let's take a few more questions. Hands shot up there. Let's do one here, one right at the front. I'll take one in the middle there, and one just over there. Let's do those four for now, and then we'll try and do another round. Yeah.
Hiya, Daniel Gain from Building Magazine. The Chancellor, the Shadow Chancellor.
I'll take it, to be honest.
Is expected to announce later today that they're going to use the stamp duty surcharge they want to introduce to fund 300 new planning officers. I was wondering, sort of directed to you particularly, is that sufficient in ambition? Do we need something much higher? And also to the rest of you, what would be your sort of priorities for a new Labour government for its first 100 days for the built environment specifically?
Okay, that is a very big second follow-up question. Okay, so question about the proposals to have more planners funded by stamp duty levies and what to do in the first 100 days. Yeah.
My name is Rika Vojcevic. I'm Head of Housing and Planning Policy for the National Federation of Builders, the largest trade association for SME house builders. So feel free to support our medium-sized site definition of between 10 and 50 homes, which would really help. Actually, it's a question about certainty around that, because I also represent the retrofitting sector, and I helped write the policy elements of the National Retrofit Strategy. Without certainty of the construction sector, we will not train enough people because we simply can't afford it. 17 construction apprentices are trained by SMEs. We build 9% of homes. That's why we have a skills crisis. So how important, or better question is, why do you think that politicians understand the link between the commercial certainty and delivery? Would you think they can solve it by just training a load of people?
Very good. Let's take the third question, which is back there.
Jane Goddard from the Building Research Establishment. My question is quite simple, which is how can we all work better together? We're all talking about the same things, we're advocating for the same things, we know the impact that the lack of skills is going to have, we know how important standards are, and we also know that we're continuing to build poor quality buildings that will need to be retrofit. So how can we work better to get from great conversations to action before, during and after the next election?
Great, thank you. And then there was a hand just here.
Thank you. I'm Julia Barfield. I'm representing Architects Declare today. I'd first of all like to endorse the thing that was being talked about with post-occupancy. I mean, I think that's so important, and I just wonder whether it could be brought in terms of planning, because it's always a question of who pays for it at the end of the day, and we know that buildings aren't performing the way that they are designed to, and this would be a way of making sure they do. And that wasn't actually what I was wanting to talk about. I was wanting to bring in the subject of the circular economy, because the UK, the building industry is responsible for 60% of the UK's waste. It's also responsible for 40% of the UK's material use. So we do need to try and bring in a more circular economy. And I think planning could maybe help in that. I know in Belgium, they're starting to mandate 50% of buildings using reused materials.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. So a range of questions there. Let me try and get through all of them by directing them to folk. Lindsay, let me come to you first on this question of the stamp duty surcharge levy, using that to invest in more planners. To what degree will that address some of the resourcing challenges that you talked about?
Well, it's not enough. And I would say that, wouldn't I? It's a start. But I think what we need to be thinking about is building the pipeline of planners, basically. So we're talking about immediate action needed for immediate resourcing, but then we need to be thinking about short term and then longer term. So it's around building that pipeline, making sure we've got more apprenticeships. Mm-hmm. So we've got RTPI are running a fantastic apprenticeship scheme. It's really rewarding. We're seeing the first apprenticeships coming through. And it's also looking at taking graduates from different disciplines. So it's not enough. It's got to be quick. We need some quick wins, but we've got to think about building the pipeline.
Very good. Let me come to you, Sandy, on this question of commercial certainty. Is it kind of appreciated that commercial operators need a sense of certainty in order to invest, to train, to build up their supply chains?
I don't think it is understood, and I think it applies to all sorts of things. Any business, any organisation delivering, whether it's a local authority or it's an SME builder or it's an architectural practice, needs certainty on how the structure operates, or else you can't plan. And we saw it in bucket loads on the retrofit and the implementation of the boiler scheme. They weren't sufficiently funded, announced, explained, so it became uncertain. People didn't know what was involved. So certainty is absolutely essential across the board on things. We need to know where we are so we can plan in the broadest sense of the word. And apprenticeships, just picking up Lindsay's point, we introduced apprenticeships at the CIOB, and from a pretty well-standing start, I think the figures are about 1,000 now. There is a need and a hunger for that, as well as the other entry into the industry. And we're an endpoint assessor. It's the way to go. It's this broad church that Justin referred to. And
Moira, let me come to you on this question of collaboration. How do we work better together? Quite a lot of agreement on this panel. I imagine a lot of agreement in the room. Are we making the most of our collective resources here? And if not, what more can we do?
So, like in my opening statement, I mentioned a collaborative effort that the Joint Institutes and others are working on, which is the standard, the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard. Mm-hmm. And that is I don't want to underplay the significance of that standard. It basically gets the engineers, the designers, the builders together, and we're working together to get an understanding and methodology of what a net zero building should look like and how to measure that. So that is a significant piece of collaborative work that we're doing. But I want to go back to the 100 days in government. Our recommendations, or what we're calling for, is fivefold. It is RR, I wrote it down, RRSSP.
You're killing me here. More acronyms. Okay. RRSSP.
So, regulation. Mm-hmm. We talked about it. Embodied and operational carbon needs to be legislated for. This is why we're supporting the Part Z for embodied carbon, mm-hmm. But also I think we need to go further within Part L about energy use. So when I'm a designer, when we look at Part L, it talks about where you get your energy from, but it also doesn't highlight what you should be doing with that energy, how you should be what you should be designing for basically how you get energy to measure the usage of your boilers and your kettles and things like that. So I think we need to go further in Part L. The retrofit strategy. We need we're calling for a sliding scale incentive for stamp duty, mm-hmm. so that the most energy efficient buildings pay less stamp duty in the point of transaction, and the least pays more, so that it incentivizes people to actually engage with the retrofit work. We're talking about skills. Mm-hmm. We at RIBA and within our profession, we're looking at diversifying the routes into the profession so that you can pick up skills as you go along, so that it's not a 7 years course that as a transition going into the architecture profession.
Yeah.
It's about sustainability. We talked about it. Sustainable buildings is only sustainable if people use it. So we need to engage with our local authorities to create a more sustainable environment that is attached to the other infrastructure that you need to use to make a site more sustainable and used. But in the last bit is post-occupancy evaluation. We are calling for the government to promote the uptake and require POE as a condition of procurement for built projects that has public funding attached to it. And it only takes a little bit of a will. And I think if we get public buildings using and uptaking post-occupancy evaluation, it sends a signal to more private developers to use it. So RRSSP.
RRSSP, okay, I've got it, I promise. Oliver, let's come to you on a final word on this question on the circular economy, because I know you're doing a huge amount of work on kind of climate and net zero. How do you think the kind of circular economy type principles might apply to this house building challenge?
You've thrown me entirely, because I thought you were going to get me with the 100 days question. So that's thrown me. Circular economy. Yeah, in terms of a circular economy in South Yorkshire, we are absolutely trying to kind of focus on how we can reinvest the money that we spend in South Yorkshire. To be clear, the Combined Authority itself we essentially give passport money to our local authorities in certain ways, so it's not really on us to get that procurement right, but we certainly want to work with partners to get that right and make sure that we are spending money in South Yorkshire. It goes back to the skills challenge and making sure that we've got the capacity in the region to then build the things that we want and that we need. So we are absolutely trying to do that, and I'm very interested in that conversation. So if anybody wants to come have that conversation with me, I'm really open to it. Do you mind if I answer the question about from BRE? I think because it's sort of top of mind for me actually. So, and firstly, I was at BRE. It's Northampton, isn't it? I came to Northampton. Watford, sorry. My knowledge of the South is limited.
Getting so much trouble with that the other way around.
Yes, I came there probably 10, 15 years ago with a bunch of MPs. I was running the design APPG, Design Innovation APPG at the time, and took some MPs there. And what I was struck by was, even then, we're talking 2009, this was not a technical challenge. I remember seeing a house on the site that was essentially heated through the TV. So the heat from the TV was enough to heat the home. So I'm conscious that this is no longer a technical challenge. It's always stuck with me that is the case. So on your answer to the question around, how can you work better to influence people like me, I think the thing is show us what works, and I think that demonstration is really powerful, because I still remember what you did. But it's also not just what you want, it's how I can do it. So I get lobbied all the time by different people telling me different things. The answer is this, or the answer is that. And I'm sure there's a kind of truth in all of that. But if the sector itself, architects, planners, builders, skills people, all the sector can come together and come to me with a core set of asks, but then tell me not just what they are, but how to do them. And don't overestimate, or don't underestimate, I suppose, politicians. Ultimately, we are dealing with millions of things all at the same time. So we need you to give us a guide, essentially, to answering these questions. And the more you can guide us and help us to navigate that world, not just in the what you want, but how to get there, will help us to do that with you and hopefully achieve better solutions for everybody.
We have got to wrap up there. I'm really sorry, we're out of time. Let me say firstly thank you to all of you for coming along and for offering your questions. Thank you to Oliver for giving up your time in your very busy diary, and a massive thank you to our 4 partners for this: CIOB, RICS, RIBA, RTPI, RRSSL. There you go. Okay, thank you so much everyone. Please offer all of my panelists a round of applause.